All right, let's get going. Okay, so welcome to week one of our class one philosophy. We're going to begin here with Plato. Hopefully, you've had a little bit of a chance to read the Apology and Crito. Now, these are two very important aspects of Western philosophy. They go into a topic that I'll be on for a little bit, which is fairly much justice. So, we're going to start looking at the traditions and origins of Western philosophy, covering some topics such as should we obey unjust laws? What responses should we have in applying unjust laws and our sort of, well, responses to them? Now, there's a difference here to consider between those who are subjects and citizens. A subject is someone who, for instance, doesn't get to vote for their government. They're just under an autocratic ruler, etc. They are subject to the law. A citizen has responsibilities, and we need to think about the duties and responsibilities and how they apply to law and how we should address it. Not everything is right, and over time we need to address many laws and improve them. And many things also come are thought of in the wrong way, and people forget about some of the duties that come with rights. Now, example here in the Second Amendment in the United States, there's the right as someone in part of the like a citizen in the United States to bear arms, but that's part of a militia. Now, if you think about what that really meant at the beginning, what they were saying is in protecting the state, the same way as someone in Switzerland, except the difference in Switzerland is you train to be part of a militia, you train to be part of that citizenry. And that you also notice that with national service and the training, the gun ownership rate in Switzerland is way higher than America, strangely as that seems, yet the problems that they have are far lower. So there are many different reasons behind that, but that's some of what we need to think about. So, in looking at apology and then going into Crito, uh, has Socrates actually obeyed an explicit command? Was it unjust? When he made the comment that he will keep acting, what does that really mean? So, in the reading that I've developed for you, you'll notice that we have a number of actions that Socrates has been taken, and he also comes up with the comment, an unexamined life is not worth living. So we'll have a bit of a think about some of these topics. So Plato and Socrates, I mean, Plato is the writer. So he documented the trial of Socrates. Socrates wrote nothing himself. And the apology really covers the last days of the imprisonment and the period leading up to the death and the whole trial there behind what happened to Socrates. Anyone who reads this will find a immense sense of injustice in our modern sort of thinking. And I think in part that's what Plato wanted to get across. Plato, of course, says that he's a gadfly. A gadfly is a problem. It bites and it's like a horsefly or something like this. It really, he's a something that makes the society think. He effectively causes them problems all the time, and he's proud of that. He's not saying anything like there are no problems. He's actually actively saying he's causing problems. He's making people think about what they're doing. And this is where most people, like in Athens at the time, 2,600 years ago, are like today. So I don't know what your opinion on this is, Ryan, but imagine what you would think. Do most people that you see on social media really want to think about the position they're taking? Do
Of
they
course.
want to? Um, what are they really aiming for?
Yeah, I mean, on social media today, that's an interesting question. Of course, they're not trying to think about things at all. What they have is they have some agenda, and
Mm,
so they're not trying to say things accurately. They're not trying to be truthful. they're trying to promote whatever their agenda is. Thinking has nothing to do with it at all. They're not trying to live the examined life. Many of them are out to get money or power or something like this. And I see this, as you and I are both very familiar in the cryptocurrency industry. For me, has been a quite a life lesson to witness the most immoral behavior I've ever seen in my life, far surpassing anything that I had imagined leading into the industry. So that's a whole other story. But in any case, no, most people in my experience, unfortunately, even when you distinguish between people that I would regard as being criminal versus just normal people, even most normal people are not trying to live an examined life. They go about their job or whatever it is, their family life and things like this. They're not examining anything, unfortunately. So that's my experience. And that seems to reflect what I understand about Plato telling the story about Socrates. You know, why would they vote to kill Socrates? Most people are just uninterested in what Socrates has to say. Anyway, that's my thoughts. What do you think?
Fairly much. So we're talking about someone who is being accused of being depraved and misleading the city's youth. Now, why is he doing that? He's saying, think about religion and God and think about whether the gods are real. He didn't actually say the gods aren't real. He said, do they really care about us? Are they engaging? And he wanted people to think about those positions. So rather than a dogmatic position, he told them that you want to consider all of the options, and maybe it's real, maybe it's not, but you have to
Yeah.
sort of weigh the balance of it. So, I mean, you talked about cryptocurrency, I'll say digital cash or digital money systems. But even the arguments over things like nodes and what Angela Welsh in 2017 called the treacherous vocabulary of blockchain, it really comes down to many of these areas that should be nice and simple have been obscured so that people can hide them. And that's quite common on everything we find now in social media. It's not, can I evaluate this? Can I go into depth? What is the real worth here? But rather, what am I able to gain? Look at the attacks you find against people. It's not the argument being attacked. It's a combination of the ad hominem fallacy or even genetic fallacies. So we're saying arguments are good and bad because of where they come from. Now, think about that
Which
for a
one? I'm
moment.
sorry, but
Who
which
says an
one?
argument?
Which one is
Sorry?
ad hominem? I don't remember. What is it?
Ad hominem is really something about the person. So attacking your opponent's character um, because of who they are. So
Yeah.
basically, you're trying to undermine an argument because it came from. So
Yeah.
I don't like person X. I think they're a bad person. It's very similar to the genetic fallacy. So judging something good or bad because of the basis of where it comes from or who it comes from.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but that's French, so therefore it must be bad. That
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah, and so so there are many every logical fallacy under the sun is being used. Yeah, lots of ad hominems,
Mm.
and that feeds into the reason why they do that, as best I can tell, is their intention is not to lead an examined life. Their intention is something other than that. That's why it fits into money and power, because they can use ad hominems and other logical fallacies to manipulate people. Basically, that's what I see.
Exactly. And most people don't think through all of the logical aspects of what they're actually considering. They don't think, well, this person who has I don't like could actually have good ideas. And that's a big aspect of modern Twitter-based society. We have this, I'm an influencer. People like me. I dress right. Now, that's not really how you decide on truth. Truth
Yeah.
is not whether someone dresses right. So Socrates there was a little problematic. He didn't go like some of his contemporaries and dress in rags and live in a barrel. We'll get to that another time. But some of his contemporaries did even that far. But Socrates taught, and he caused problems. He used to go around teaching that the whole way that people were instructing how to win in court was wrong, how the sophists were actually corrupting people by teaching them Machiavellian techniques, which would be win at any cost, undermine your enemy, use emotional tactics rather than logic.
Yeah.
And although that may win in the short term, it doesn't actually create truth, and you don't find what's really right and wrong in society. So
Yeah.
this is one of the foundational areas of Western philosophy. So
Yeah.
this nature of
Could I just
really,
pause? I'm sorry to
yeah,
interrupt, Craig, but I
certainly.
just want to comment something on the last slide that I just thought you, in your paper that you wrote on this,
Hmm.
you cited another interesting paper. I didn't look at all the
Mm.
references, but I looked at some of them on the definition of gadfly. And I
Hmm.
thought it was interesting because gadfly, I sort of get it. It's a fly that bites cattle and it irritates them.
Mm.
But a different translation was actually a spur. And a spur is completely different in my interpretation, that it's something that
Is.
you spur a horse to make it go. It actually
Hmm.
makes more sense if the way they were using, if the way Socrates was using that word was he's a spur. What do you think about that particular thing? Like, how do you interpret gadfly in this
I
case?
think he actually used a lot of double entendre. So when he was saying this, he knew that how people saw him, but
Yeah.
that was, you've picked up really, and why I put that other paper, that was really what he was trying to get. So what he's doing is saying, yes, you see me as this horsefly, a gadfly, something that's biting you and causing problems.
Yeah.
But what I'm really doing is making you active, getting you off your couch, getting you to engage. And
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, the way he ended up with the whole community, like 5,000 people were jurors at this time, came in and voted, was to actually say, I'm sorry, we don't like you. So not all of them. I mean, it was probably 40, 60. So he did sway some people, but not enough.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So he's very sophisticated, is what I mean. Like he's kind of speaking above most people's levels to use a double entendre, assuming Plato is accurately reflecting Socrates here. It's a very sophisticated way to speak there, if I'm
It
using
is.
that word correctly.
I think you are. So we're going to go through the full tradition here, and as you've seen, I've gotten you another week's sort of reading for next week, which I'm purposely trying to fit in topics so that everyone, if they really try, can read this within a week for the most part. So we can
Mhm.
cover this every week. Now, next week we're doing books 1 and 2 of the Republic. I'd hope people actually don't just stop on book 1 and 2, that they go much further. I mean, there are 10 books in the Republic, and
Yeah.
it's a beautiful read, is the only way I put it. The aesthetic qualities of the text is, depending on the translation, are remarkable. So Plato is what many people would call the father of modern philosophy. He is the European Western traditional philosopher. Now, I don't agree with everything that Plato teaches. No one should, no one will. I probably align much more with Aristotle myself. I like the sort of more logical, down to earth, less utopian vision that Aristotle has. Aristotle's more of a realist. So Aristotle was also more revered during the Middle Ages. So I've just written a paper concerning the origins of the Islamic Golden Age. Part of what I'm saying is it's not so much the Arab individuals that caused the Golden Age, but really the empire spread from um, right to the borders of China, into India, into the circulate areas, Persia, into southern Europe with some of the areas in Italy and Sardinia and Spain and Corsica and the northern African areas. And really, what that allowed, the transfer of knowledge that was done in that period, brought in all of these old philosophers like Aristotle and had them translated into Greek and Roman again, and even vernacular and Hebrew and things like this, and it transferred that information around. So then, as the Crusades happened and as Europe went back into sort of meeting with the people in the East, they also re-vitalized themselves with this old philosophy, leading to a rebirth of society. And then what do we have around the 14th century?
Well, the Americas were discovered around that. I don't know what else you're referring to there.
No, that's a little bit later, but I'm saying we have this thing with Da Vinci and Michelangelo,
Renaissance and the
and we have
Enlightenment.
the Renaissance, and the Enlightenment then follows after that. So we have this birth of humanistic knowledge. So during the 19th century, we once again have Hegel, Kant, both saw Aristotle and Plato as incredibly sort of intelligent and erudite. And I mean, even now, few, as it says there, few philosophers will go without saying how beneficial Plato has been, even when they don't agree with them. So I don't agree with many of the aspects of what Plato says in some of his later books, especially in the Republic. Some I do, though. Some of the ones like the first couple books, I will definitely say we do. And I still think that the Apology and Crito are some of the most remarkable sort of books on injustice that abound. So we're going to have a man of unbounded courage, steadfast morality. He stays to his view no matter what. I hope to live up to this sort of view of the truth. I can't say I always do. I
Yeah.
try. I mean, this is why we also look and examine ourselves. Over time, we try and get better. We make mistakes and we improve.
Could I
And
just could
yeah,
I comment on something? Just the way that you're talking about Plato, and Plato is very early that we have records of, but civilization goes back at
mm,
least thousands of years before Plato that we don't have as clear records of these things. We give it sounds like when people talk about Plato a lot, they give credit to him, but does he really deserve credit for these things, or is he someone that is like basically we just don't have records of what happened before? Like, how much credit does Plato deserve for these ideas?
we don't have many records of societies that were democratic. There have been some.
Okay.
This was one of the earliest. So again, as it says down in the bottom right, without Plato, we would also know nothing about Socrates because Socrates didn't write anything down. So the Homeric legends, and there's probably actually two Homers to tell you the truth. Um, the two works are a little bit different, but they were also verbal. So people would memorize and have a methodology of replaying these legends and things in the past. Socrates didn't write, but other people did. So we also have a lot that we've lost. So there are many aspects of even Platonic philosophy. We don't have everything. The plays, Asclepiodes and others, we'll cover some of these. Much of the work of the playwrights has been lost over time, and which is very unfortunate. So much of it saved because of Islamic scholars who recopied it in the 8th till 12th centuries. So um, all of that's very important as well. Even when you look at some of the texts, when you look at papyrus or other sort of scrolls and you see the holes through them, it makes it difficult to translate, and that becomes a problem. So looking at well, Plato's using other people as his mouthpiece. The dialogue is an interesting way of actually holding a conversation and teaching. So we're looking at how he makes people talk. What does he give them? So sometimes he treats them with a lot more respect than others, especially we'll see that during next week's lecture. But he creates characters out of the individuals. He gives them a life of their own. Not always good. Some of them, you'll see that he has. You've read this already. I mean, how would
Yeah.
you characterize how he portrays some of his people that he
Well,
has?
yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, well, they all have different personalities and things. So he seems to be using the different figures as a way to go at arguments in the form of these dialogues. So
Hmm.
rather than just write up some logical proof of things, like I don't know if Aristotle would do something like this, but everything's taking place with dialogue. So you have these different personalities that promote some view that he's working through with dialogue. Is that what you're getting at there? I mean,
Correct. And that's the thing. We don't really know if the personalities were all the same. Sometimes we have some idea because other writers have had a similar view, but we don't always know. But many of the mentioned people are historical figures. We know that they did exist. Alcibiades, General Nicias, etc. These were all people who are mentioned by multiple authors. So whether we can agree that Socrates got them right, it comes down to if any author writes something, a biography, etc., do you really capture the person? So, but that's not the purpose here anyway. So let's have a look at, we're going to have an interaction between people.
Could I interject
Yep.
something? Something
Yeah.
interesting that Socrates even mentioned in part of he was saying that he was actually mischaracterized by other people, if I understood the text
Hmm.
correctly. So Socrates is saying is that other guy that was a poet writing about him, he seemed to be asserting that people had a lot of beliefs about Socrates that were
Hmm.
based on false sort of fictional ideas. Now we don't know if Plato is actually characterizing Plato correctly. So maybe that's
Socrates, you mean?
yeah, or sorry,
Yeah,
yeah, Plato. We don't know if Plato is characterizing Socrates correctly. So maybe that's exactly what's going on here. So
exactly.
anyway, yeah, I mean,
But is anything really accurate? I mean, you
yeah,
never know all aspects of anything that you see reported. So that's another part of it. So Plato was young at the time. Socrates was already quite old for the society he was in. He was 70. Athenian courts, basically, Meletus, Lycon, and Anytus made a number of accusations, and that then gets seen before the entire society. So, I mean, this is the voting society, which, of course, we're not talking like we see now with everyone having the franchise. The franchise would be men who were able to act in war, etc. So this is something where to be a citizen, you needed to be a warrior, or at least formally one, or could help in some way, or invest in the city, or have property, or that sort of thing. So it wasn't all people. It didn't include slaves. It didn't include foreigners, etc. So in this, Socrates doesn't really do himself any no favors. I mean, it's definitely not what you would call the best um, sort of argument put forth by anyone trying to defend themselves against, well, possible court-sanctioned death.
yeah.
I mean, if you've read some of the quotes there now. I mean, how would you look at how Socrates defended himself?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, one thought I have is perhaps he's simply being himself, which is this gadfly to go out and
Hmm.
provoke people. So even as he's trying to defend himself in court, he's actually just doing the very thing that he always does, which is exactly why he's been dragged into court. So maybe he's not even trying. So it's a very he clearly is a very based on the writings of Plato. I feel like I have to
Hmm.
qualify it that way because I'm not convinced Socrates is being accurately portrayed by Plato. I don't know how I would know that. But based on the writings of Plato, he is a very principled philosopher that truly believes in what he's doing. He thinks that it's very important to be a gadfly. And
Hmm.
what better place to embody his philosophical, way of being than in court when
Hmm.
everybody's there and they're voting on him. So that's what I think he's doing. He's not really giving a serious defense unless he expects the people of Athens to actually suddenly be won over to this examined life, which they
Hmm.
aren't, or he wouldn't be in court.
Yeah. So some other aspects to consider, the history at the time. Thucydides writes about some of the prolonged conflicts that Sparta and Athens had been in. So Athens was more powerful economically. Sparta, of course, was the military power of Greece. And what Sparta were seeing is as the economic power of Athens was growing, and it was, they were becoming more and more powerful. They could buy ships, they could form in the Dalian League, the Athenian League of different city-states, more and more alliances and gain more power. So that was worrying. We see similar conditions right now. I mean, if you look at the instance of like Russia and Putin, then we're seeing his neighboring countries wanting to align with NATO, and that would put people right on his border. So Russia, this traditionally in the past strong nation, is comparatively not as strong as it used to be. It's relatively weak compared to the other powers around it now. And as the economic power of America and Europe grow, he's feeling squeezed. The same sort of thing happened with Sparta. As Sparta basically um, it felt more and more squeezed as Athens allied with all of its surrounding neighbors. Now, that made a number of wars, and because of all that, we had constant upheaval, including rule by oligarchs, with overturning of government, back to democracy. It was messy. So Socrates lived through all that. Socrates was actually part of the military at the time. He went to war. He has experienced battle. So he understands that, and the constant warfare that Athens had gone through in the decades before this, it's something he remembers and he talks about. The people we become anti-oligarchical, anti-aristocratic, but equally, Socrates was showing how if you just have a mob, if it's not a balance between different aspects of society, then you're going to have problems. So the people at the time were also rebelling against the sort of aristocratic sort of, well, group that had taken power. And Socrates, by saying, look, you need to balance your government. You can't just have a demagogue, anyone who basically, at the whim of someone on social media in the time, with the equivalent of social media, can influence things. You need something more steady. And that was part of it. So as you go into the history here, you also find that we have similar conditions now. Some of the what people will see in the rise of popularist politics again mirrors some of this. The more move to pure democracy, saying we don't want the Senate to control America. We want to limit the ability for people to be stopped from direct votes straight away. The same sort of arguments are happening all over. So we find also that Socrates is unwilling to commit what he sees as injustice to stymie his beliefs. I mean, I probably cause a lot of problems for many people in that I'm incredibly firm in my belief structure too. So unless you can convince me that I'm logically flawed in my argument, then too bad, I'm a stubborn bastard. So should we obey an unjust law? Now, there's an interesting part of this. Did you notice the two aspects of what happened in the Apology and Crito? The two seemingly contradictory and conflicting areas we need to address.
So Socrates had so he both was in favor of following the law as well as opposed to following the law. So in one case he was saying, so in his defense in the Apology, he's saying something like, I am willing, I believe that, you know, the gods compel me or something of the sort to continue to be a philosopher, and I'm willing to break the law if necessary, because I'm doing what, you know, I don't mean to put words in his mouth, I don't remember the exact words, but, you know, I'm doing what I believe in my heart to be right or something like this. In Crito, he was saying the opposite. He's saying, no, Crito, I don't want to escape because you know, that would be to break the law. And he gives us this this argument about why that would be such a bad idea to break the law at the very end here. So is that what you're referring to? There's a contradiction in the way that Socrates
is. It's a seeming contradiction. I'll actually say it's not quite a contradiction. The distinction here is when he's going before people, he's saying, my future actions are, I will do this. He's saying, this is how I am. If you don't want me and you put me to death, so be it. I will live with that. But I am going to do this. If you don't want me to do this and you put me to death, then so be it. I accept your judgment. But notice he has told them up front. He hasn't hidden anything. It hasn't been secretive or deceptive or anything like this. He's always been honest in what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
So What is an unjust law? There are many different sort of arguments around that, and over the weeks and weeks and weeks, this is going to all take, and years probably, we're going to start seeing that there are many different versions of how people see what is just and unjust, and there's no one answer. There are some things in the universe that may be objective, physics, for instance, but when we come to morality, culture, etc., then there are a lot of aspects of society that really come down to our belief structure and what we feel. So, referring to an unjust law, we can look at Aquinas and natural law theory. We'll get to that eventually. I'm not sure what week that is, but we need to think about why something is unjust. Is everyone equal under the law? That doesn't mean that everyone has the same amount of money or everyone has the same intelligence. It means if they bring in the same fact, it will be treated the same way. It doesn't matter whether they're black or they're white or they're Chinese or they're Indian or anything. It just matters these are the facts. And the law should be blind. So that's the traditional thing. The lady there, the Athenian sort of goddess, she is blind to judging and weighs just on the scales. So what we need to think about is what would a conscientious citizen be doing in objecting to the law if they believe it's right or wrong? Now, here's an important aspect. It isn't, I'm going to cover myself up and anonymously do something. It is actively taking responsibility. So think about South Africa. Recently, Mandela, former President Mandela, died. He spent many years in prison, many, many years, and then ended up the head of his society. But the interesting thing here, he wasn't trying to escape, he was fighting from within. So he accepted the responsibility for what he did. He'd do it again. And there are many people who will do this. I don't always agree with why they're doing it. Sometimes, and people sit there going, oh, it's not fair, they shouldn't X, Y, Z. But the reality here is if you're going to do this and you want to cause sort of people to think about it, then you have to weigh the benefits and costs and accept that if you go to prison, you go to prison. That's just how it is. So there are many reasons for disobeying unjust laws. We've seen a lot of people protesting over many things. Sometimes they're sane, sometimes they're not. But at least people think. Plato really defends himself in a view of truth. It's really teaching us that sometimes there are miscarriages of justice. This is one of the most famous ones, but it's not the only one. And just because justice hasn't worked doesn't mean that we don't follow justice, if you're seeing what I'm saying. So sure. He will not, in his defense, stop teaching, but he equally doesn't hide that. He doesn't go in there, go, I'm sorry, if you let me off this time, I'll change. He said, look, I'm not going to. I'm going to do this. I'm going to address it. Your choice how you respond to that. So what response? If we're going to think about unjust law, we've got to think about whether a law is just or unjust and how it's being applied. So laws can be corrupt, people can be corrupt, and even just law can be misapplied. So we're going to have a law that is justly applied or unjustly applied or seemingly good but wrong. I don't know if you know the Dreyfus case. That was around 100 years ago. He was a Jewish man in the French military who was charged falsely with treason because he was Jewish. Now,
merely Jewish.
Mm-hmm. So he was persecuted because of his race. The person made up stories and fabricated evidence, and a lot of sort of genetic fallacy against him. He is a Jew, therefore he's bad, and a lot of ad hominem saying all the things he did and all this sort of stuff. And most of it was completely fabricated. The man was innocent, but that doesn't stop people from doing something that is wrong. So if you think about people who blindly follow the justice system, they're also going to cause problems. Not everything is right. Not everything is going to be correct. So humans, judges, juries, we're all human. We're fallible. We can make mistakes. And because of this, miscarriages of justice can occur. But that doesn't mean we get rid of the entire system. The baby and the bathwater shouldn't be thrown out together because once in a while mistakes happen. But it also makes us think where we want to put the burden of proof. It's different in a civil case and a criminal case. In a criminal case, because of the high cost in our society, we weigh more in favor of not putting people in jail. So what we look at is we look at the burden of proof and we make it more likely that we'll basically acquit the person because, well, hard to prove what they've done. Difficult. So we don't want miscarriage of justice to occur. We want to make sure that we rule more in favor, but that's not going to be perfect, is it? So we should demand obedience and also think about when to have disobedience and what the cost is, though. So this means if people want to sort of take on the system, in our Western society, they shouldn't be hiding as anonymous Twitter trolls. They should be out there with their own name, taking responsibility for what they do.
Yeah.
Otherwise, well, I mean, that's a problem in itself. So this is a problem. People say, oh, we need to be have an anonymity so people can come out and say these things. But that doesn't actually bring out truth. I mean, if you look at most of the things in WikiLeaks, everyone goes, oh, wow, WikiLeaks, great, except there wasn't really much happened. I mean, what did WikiLeaks achieve? They're not out of Cuba. They didn't get out of anywhere. They managed to get a few people killed because they had actionable intelligence about ongoing operations exposed, helped a few terrorists, and I'm going to say it this way because it's true. They didn't really do anything good. They self-promoted. They said, look, we're wonderful. But they didn't work as responsible journalists. They didn't validate sources. They went out there and just said, we're going to dump anything no matter how bad it is. See the difference?
Yeah. Yeah.
So Socrates, of course, stood before his accusers.
Can we pause just for a moment and just consider, I mean, what do you think would be the right way? Suppose you do see something unjust, exactly what Julian Assange sees in his own, view there. What would be the correct way, in your view, to resolve corruption or whatever it is? I mean, what should Julian Assange have done?
So journalism used to be more than a bunch of reporters dumping everything on the internet.
Yeah.
So imagine the scandal in the White House during Nixon's time. I mean, neither of us were really around at that time, but both of us should know Watergate. Many movies, lots to read. I'm old enough in my 50s now that I can still remember lots of talk as I was growing up. And those journalists investigated. They didn't just take the information. They spent a lot of time at personal risk validating and verifying everything that they put out. They didn't just dump things on the internet, so to speak. They validated and verified. So that's a very different position. So if you're a responsible journalist, you act as a journalist and you investigate, you validate, you check your sources, you put together a series of evidential sort of ideas to make an argument to go, if this is true, and here's evidence that it is, and here's supporting evidence for that, then this is a high possibility.
Yeah.
Here's an alternative. Here's the evidence. So that's
Yeah.
very different. Just dumping a pile of files and going, we don't know where they came from. It's an anonymous person. I mean, really?
Yeah. Okay. So responsible journalism is what he should have done is a way to separate everything, I think.
Oh, exactly. I mean, even in my trial last year in November, there were um, files obtained randomly through the internet. Now, none of them were validated, and this is my argument over and over. So, someone sent you a random file that I'm saying I don't recognize, and no one else has ever validated, and you're
Yeah.
trying to say it's not hearsay. Like someone on Twitter sent me a file.
Yeah.
How do you know that it's real?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Okay, I see what you're saying. So we don't. So that's a really interesting point there. So we don't even really know in Julian Assange data dump what is even real because it hasn't been verified the way that you're talking about. So it's
correct.
very difficult to assess. It's kind of putting the burden of doing the investigation on everybody that looks at the material rather than doing that work up front there.
Yeah, and one of the problems with this is it's great for social media. So Facebook, Meta, whatever they want to call themselves this week, and Twitter and all this other stuff, wonderful for them. It helps with conspiracy theories and it helps make arguments, and people sit there going, but I saw it on Twitter. Yeah, so what? A bunch of anonymous trolls, off you go. See, that's the problem. When we have responsible journalism and people accountable for what they're doing, then we have this next part here. Each citizen has social responsibilities. Rights come with duties. Privilege comes with duties. So when we have citizenship rights, that is different to just the rights of being a human. So if you look in America, you have human rights defined and citizenship rights defined, and they're different. The human rights everyone gets, even if they're from um, Syria or something like this. On the other hand, citizenship requires that you are an American citizen. I don't get citizenship rights in America. So
okay, well, okay. Um, okay, well, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. You're provoking thought here.
Please.
I'm just, this is all, my question, so what constitutes a responsible citizen then in the context of, suppose we do see unjust laws, which I do see in this very moment, and I'm asking myself this very question. What does it mean to be a responsible citizen in those circumstances? What does one do if you see unjust laws?
Again, examine. So the examine life. Now, each of us are going to have different skills, different abilities. Part of what I'm trying to do, apart from learning, I did a Master of Science in politics and political science, and I'm just finishing my MSc in criminal justice at the moment. I'm a bit weird in that I need to academically understand everything to understand things properly. So I delve in, I suck up information and I synthesize it that way. Now, other people might get out there and might talk about things. They might protest. They might write letters to their member of parliament or congressman over there. Maybe you'll get involved. So that's the whole thing. Citizenship comes with responsibility. You can write about law. You can say, we need to do things. You need to say why. You can lobby. So,
okay, can I just follow? You said something interesting though, because it's not like there's a list of things you're supposed to do to be a responsible citizen. What you just said was, it's like whatever is appropriate for you to do to be a responsible citizen is what you should do. It's kind of a subjective view of being a responsible citizen.
So there are some objective things, of course. For instance, you shouldn't be graffitiing. You shouldn't be throwing rubbish on the street and spitting on people and things like this. There is a level of due respect.
Okay.
So the notion of defending the state. You live in the state. I mean, America exists because a bunch of people fought for the rights. That should be something that we consider now. I mean, yes, you can be a pacifist, and Society of Friends, Quakers, etc., have their view on things, and I respect that view. But equally, there are other things, and this has been demonstrated time and time again, such as being a medic, that can be done. So sitting there and going, I don't agree, then I can't be part of it, is just wrong. So,
Okay. Yeah.
hmm.
Oh,
So,
I just one brief comment on that too, because I forget exactly where this was in the works of Plato here. I just remember reading something like, maybe this was actually in what your commentary on it, but you just gave a list of what not to do. So you didn't give an objective list of these are the requirements. It's more like, well, here are the things that we know not to do. That if you did these things, that's being irresponsible.
yes.
Is that correct? Like, or is there a list of things that you should do, or is we're basically pointing out, well, I don't know what you should do, but here are the things that you should not do.
I'm going to put it this way: different societies will be different, and each society will have its norms and customs, and some of them should be challenged and some of them should be accepted. And there isn't one right or wrong that I can say. I can say that you should respect property rights and you shouldn't go around knocking over statues. You should be able to protest about them and say that they should be torn down and put up banners and take out advertisements in the paper and all sorts of fun things like that. But you shouldn't be able to put sort of funny outfits on and storm Congress in America, no matter what you think. So there are limits, but I think it goes into sort of the Posner bit that I'll get into next week, which is um, like in obscenity or pornography. It's difficult to find a definition of it, but you know it when you see it. And that's part of what I argue as well in the definition of justice. So there are many analogies given in justice. We'll go into that one next week, but citizenship is also analogous in that way. You can find examples of what it is to be a good citizen, but definitively putting a definition down, that's hard. So, what is good? What is bad? And this is something that is important now. It means conversation, engagement, argument, people talking. So, people being part of society and sitting there arguing back and forwards, going, oh, I don't agree with that. Actually, this is what you should do.
Yeah. So yeah, if I could just this is right, and this is an idea that you brought up many times, but this is the importance of education, because if understanding justice is something that it's not a simple textbook, or dictionary definition that you can just look up and say yes or no. It's something that the only way people can deliver justice is if they're educated, which is they're going through something like what you and I are doing now, or they're doing some other mechanism to become educated about these matters. So that suppose you are on a jury, that you're already sufficiently educated on these questions and answers that you can deliver justice.
Yes. So, I mean, that's actually something that I'll recommend as well. I've said this many times. Jury service is a form of education. It teaches us how society works, and it teaches what happens, and people understand. So, education isn't just what you learn, it's what you experience in things like jury service as well. So, when we're discussing all of these things, I mean, I'll tell you that I'm finishing my PhD in law this year. I've got um, qualifications in criminal justice and political science, and yet I can't just say this is what makes a society and this is the way it must be, because there isn't one answer. There are many different forms, and different cultures will have different sort of overlaps and aspects of that. And each of it, I mean, um, for instance, if you're French, you're going to have a different view of what makes a good life than if you're English. I mean, that sounds sort of a little strange to some people, but it is. I mean, the history, the shared aspect of culture change what people actually want. So, going back to old Socrates here, he's got a nice little quote there, and he's not arguing for his own sake. Rather, he's really fighting for what he thinks is right. And we've seen that many times in society. We've seen that with a number of conscientious objectors. We've seen that with people like I mentioned, Mandela, people who will fight for what they believe in, no matter the cost. I don't particularly agree with Gandhi. I think his socialist views actually resulted in a lot of damage to India and the people there. Yet his way of doing it, his ability to stand up and force change, actually achieved goals and changed society. Personally, I think the way that it sort of ended up in splitting Pakistan into Bangladesh and Pakistan and India in the middle, and it was messy, and it could have been done better. But what I'm saying is people fight for change and they can achieve it. So Socrates can be said to have disobeyed an explicit command, and we've covered a little bit on this. Was it unjust? Was it right? Did he do the correct thing? So what do you think? What do you think? Should he have done that, or?
Yeah, I mean, should he have continued teaching philosophy? Is that what you're referring to? I mean, because
should he have promised to stop?
Of course not. I mean, I can say, because I can, as weird as it is, I feel like I can sympathize with Socrates a lot here. It's like, look, when people are like, what they have pulled him in front of court for and accused it, and like where the punishment is death for these absurd, non-crimes, you got to stand up for yourself. You can't just bend over and say, I'll just do whatever you say, or you're going to kill me. And this is completely ridiculous. You can't let that stand. So you have to be willing to defend yourself. And Socrates was doing that. And sometimes you have to defend yourself to the death. So I actually agree with what Socrates was doing. And I hope that I have the courage to do that should I be in an analogous situation at some point in my life, to be willing to defend myself to the death against something that is obviously unjust. So I think what Socrates did was correct. Yeah, what do you think?
So the founding fathers of your country had this concept that to be a enlightened democratic nation required virtue. It required courage and conviction. Now, that meant that you had to stand up and fight for what you believed in, not secretly as putting on a mask and pretending to be Guy Fawkes and blow up a building. Guy Fawkes wasn't a hero. I mean, the irony of Guy Fawkes' day is everyone now treats him like he was a hero. He was being mocked. I mean, no one took him seriously. I mean, he was a joke. I mean, he still should be. The guy wanted to blow up Parliament and kill people, not try and change things properly. So that's the difference. Going out there and wanting to kill other people and be a terrorist, that's externalizing. Courage is within. Courage is the conviction to face whatever the cost is. So it means learning and understanding. So people look at me like the Roger Vers of the world and others that I'm fighting against and go, oh, you just follow the state. No, I don't. I actually stand up for what I believe in. I mean, I used to be part of the Liberal Party in Australia years ago. I was actually the treasurer of the Electoral Commission area for New South Wales and also the president of the Bradfield division. I mean, I've had several prime ministers over for dinner, friends with a few, etc. I mean, I had that level of connections in the past. And despite all that, I resigned from the party when Australia reintroduced sedition laws. I actually felt so strongly anti the introduction of a sedition law, which is causing problems over there now, that I resigned.
Is that part of why you left? Because I don't know that I know the full story there, but is that because you ultimately left Australia, which was a pretty dramatic move there?
Not as much as people make. I mean, the media's Yeah, I actually left Australia in October of 2015, and the whole media story broke in December of 2015. So I'd already moved to the UK, but why let the facts get in the way of a good story?
Yeah.
I mean, a whole swatting and raiding of my empty house that I hadn't lived in for 2 months, or 3 months actually. But anyway, that's a different story. So law can be seemingly just, and it can be written in a way that it may seem to have good outcomes in applied. But if it's not always just, if it's not equal, that's a problem. Also, we can think of unjustly created laws that are done for the wrong reasons, and even decrees without valid process, which may seem right, but I mean, imagine if Mr. Biden there exceeded his executive power and told everyone in the country, this is what you must do. And for instance, said, all children are now going to um, be taught Christian values. I might be Christian, but I respect your right not to be. Imagine if he said that. He said, I want everyone to be Catholic because I'm Catholic. Then that's exceeding his ability. And even if you were Catholic and you thought that was right, I mean, that would be wrong. Now, we, at least you and I, both live in a modern democratic society. You are formerly part of England over there. George III was your last king. I love saying it this way. I mean,
Okay,
you're a
we are formally a part of England. Is that for real? I've never heard that before. In
well,
what
you
way?
are. You're colonies of England.
Okay,
King George III was your king. I know you
okay,
don't like to teach that, but over here in England, we remember that you guys are the naughty little children who ran off. And,
okay.
yes, maybe we spanked you too hard, whatever. So anyway, modern, sort of mostly liberal democratic society, we have ways of creating rules. Um, we have judicial activism that's a problem. I think we should do something about that. I don't think judges who are not elected should be able to overturn things. I think they should be basically following the letter of the law. But we need to act democratically to change these things openly by going out there and making sure that we don't hide, don't go on the internet as anonymous trolls, and take the risk, take the responsibility for whatever it is, and understand so that people answer back to us. Now, this comes back into the unexamined life. Now, I could go out there and read myself. I can read lots of books. I do. Um, I mean, I don't even know. I mean, I'm graduating from 6 postgraduate degrees this year, so I have actually no idea how many qualifications I have. But
If you have
what
so many qualifications, aren't you smart enough to keep track of how many qualifications you have, Craig?
I got a box and I just throw them in as I get them. So it gets ridiculous anyway. If I tried to write letters after my name, everyone would laugh. I've done that before. It got to like 2 pages. So anyway, getting back to really examining life and think about deep integrity. And like what I keep studying in academic circles because it's not just my idea anymore. If you think about reading a book, think what that means. If you don't get challenged, you don't really grow. So if I pick up a book and I go, oh, information technology law, and
Yeah,
I want to read it, I'll gain knowledge. But if I
yeah,
really want to gain knowledge, I'll have an argument with someone and someone knowledgeable on the topic, and they will give me little points I didn't think about. So um, when I'm studying or have a supervisor that I push against, then I learn. And that's a critical part of this. So the unexamined life is not in isolation. You can't be a hermit living on top of a pillar. You can't live in that cave alone. I mean, you might think you can. You might, in Eastern philosophy, go, I'm going to just talk to myself and learn. You don't. If you want to learn, you need social interaction. And I'm an Aspie, and I'm saying this.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so think about what that means. Think about what he did. Socrates went out there and challenged people day in, day out. That made them grow. And that can be a little disconcerting for a lot of people. I mean, think
Yeah.
about it. If someone tells you, I think you're doing wrong, what do you normally do? You get your back up and you go, you can't tell me I don't know these things, etc. All
Yeah,
of
I
this
just
is
realized that what they did in killing Socrates was was deplatforming him. So like today they don't kill you, they just cut you off of Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and these things. They
thanks,
deplatform
Jack.
him, killing him. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yes, that's generally what they think is killing you now. I've got rid of your Facebook and I've got rid of your Twitter, so ha ha.
Yeah.
My wife actually is rather thankful for that, to tell you the truth.
Oh,
But
yeah,
anyway,
I just deleted my Facebook this morning, Craig, for what it's worth. It's
mhm.
just a coincidence, but I really did delete it this morning. So I'm deplatforming myself to opt out of those
Mm.
systems. But anyway,
So to chuck in a little bit, and each week you'll notice I do this. I've got a little bit from Hamlet here. I quite like Shakespeare. Um, Coriolanus is one of the harder up there with Macbeth to understand in some ways. It seems a bit more empty, but there's a lot of depth in Coriolanus. But for what we're doing here, Hamlet, the famous little soliloquy of to be or not to be. This is thinking about and examining his life. It's not ideal the way he did it, of course. Old Hamlet there procrastinated a lot. He sat there and he took far too much time to act. I mean, if you think about the alternative at the end of the play, and I won't try and give it all away, but the guy who acted, well, he was still alive at the end. A lot of dead people in Hamlet. A lot
yeah.
of people died, but the guy who went out there and acted and didn't procrastinate lived. So that says something in itself. So if we're going to think about the slings of outrageous fortune, to take arms against a sea of trouble, that's what we're talking about. We're saying, is it right to go out there and do something knowing that I might face adversity? Or should I sit on my couch and enjoy life? I mean, um, as an example, I could have a nice, easy life. I could um, uh, sort of not care about my protocol and what I wanted to create and just live off the money I've made. And I'd be fine.
Yeah.
I could have a nice life, travel a lot, have a bit of time, spend more time reading. So what? Think about it. Why are we here? We're here for a short amount of time, and if we don't interact, if we become virtual couch potatoes, then why have we bothered? So,
Yeah.
for those who want to go a little bit further, I also recommend a little bit of Shakespeare there. So, based on Socrates' actions, was he wise? And this also references something else. So, the oracle at Delphi, old Socrates went and had a bit of a visit, and he asked them about who the wisest person was. And they told him it was him. And you know why Socrates was so wise?
Well, because Socrates claimed to know nothing. Is that what it is? Like he keeps going around telling people, you
How
think you're
little he knew.
exactly
Yes.
like that was the one thing he knew that no one else knew was how little he knew. Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. So everyone else sits there going, I know, blah. And Socrates says, I really don't know. I mean, I've been there and I've experienced this and I've got some ideas, but I don't know. I mean, that doesn't mean he was without knowledge, that he was unwise. It means he knew he had limits, even when he knew something. I mean, think about physics today.
Yeah.
Do we actually know what an electron is?
Yeah, interesting. I could go on for that for a long time, but I'll say I believe the mainstream does not know what an electron is.
I don't think any of us ever will. I'm doing a philosophy paper at the moment on this sort of topic. I'm more of a realist, but I don't think we ever really get there. I think we probabilistically get our knowledge through scientific process closer and closer, but sometimes we go a little bit far, but all over the place, etc. So what we do is we describe this unknown. I mean, it's like the old question of color. I don't know if you know, but there are two different color blindness genes in humans. And if you have both, red and green, you can see both of them, but they're reversed.
Really? How in the world do you measure that? Because isn't that's that question of it, what if my red is your green? And you're
Yeah,
saying
it's the
how do
old
you
qualia question. So
yeah,
there are tests for it that but it's really difficult, and people didn't realize it for a long time. But I mean, imagine that you sit there and you go, it's a very lovely green bottle, and everyone else thinks it's red.
yeah,
The same way. I mean, your color is reversed. It's
yeah. Well,
strange.
I'll have to look that up. That's truly fascinating.
Mm.
That's really interesting.
So that goes in the whole notion of qualia, and what we see isn't really reality. The empirical bit. I mean, if you think about it for a minute, the wavelengths of light, whether it's blue, green, red, they're not real. We see these things, and we've evolved to see, but that's not reality in itself. The sort of matrixy type seeing things that aren't there is probably more of it, like seeing, oh, there's a certain number of photons hitting me from this spectrum, but
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd want to live that way either. So old Socrates has a bit of a sort of debate in each of these, in Crito and the Apology. And we have the birth of natural law, like the rule of a higher law. And not that we all know what this is, but there feels in some of our conscious something that is right or wrong, and we stand for it. So we support that, but not all laws are equal. So we stand for our beliefs and we fight for them, but that doesn't mean that we just win and that injustice goes away. It's a slow process. The problem many people don't seem to understand is that in understanding like the liberal democratic capitalist process, change is slow. But think of what happens when we try and change quickly. If we go back to Rousseau, what happened in the French Revolution?
I don't know. I don't know. What did Rose say about? I'm not sure what happened.
So Rousseau had the whole emotional response and everything's wrong and we're in chains, throw them off. And rather than sort of the more constrained version of the American Revolution, 1766, sorry, 76, we had people's heads being lopped off and terror. Now, think about Marx and Lenin and then Stalin. Let's change everything now. And
Yeah.
guess what? Think how many people died. Think of Mao. Let's
Yeah.
change because
Yeah.
we can.
Yeah.
Well, that's the whole thing. When we're doing it in a liberal democratic capitalist system, it doesn't happen quickly because someone over here is trying something and someone over here is trying something, and we don't actually know which policy is right. And it gets a little bit better and a little bit better. And sometimes we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back and etc. And that's the whole point. It's not quick, but it doesn't mean it's not happening. Think what society was 100 years ago. Think of the level of sustenance of how many people died from treatable diseases 100 years ago, and think where we are now.
You say that,
Society
but
is.
that's happening in this moment, Craig. Is that, like people, like I'm just give an American reference, but this is definitely not just America. This is global. The people have gotten less healthy recently. So the state of nutrition, like all this obesity, for example, obesity is a visible problem, but there are many other health ailments. I think health is on the decline globally. I'm not sure we're healthier. I think we're reverting to some. In fact, I think what's happening now is kind of unprecedented in global health, actually. So
Well, this comes back to virtus and virtue and getting off that proverbial couch or even real couch, doesn't it?
yeah, people need to they need to be responsible citizens, which is
Hmm.
probably not eating a bag of potato chips on the couch or whatever. So
But if we're going to have a nanny state and incentivize people and protect them no matter what, and we're going to be parents and leave people as children, guess what happens? They stay children. So
yeah,
part of the Enlightenment philosophy was people are adults. Well, after a certain age. So you have to treat adults as adults, and they will make mistakes. Guess what happens if you try and stifle children too much?
stifle them in what way? Like you try to
Not let them go out there and try things and fail and
yeah, if you try to keep them safe, so you don't let them go out and play because
hmm,
you want to keep them safe, you're actually hurting them because they never learn.
exactly. So the same thing with society, with people. We need to allow people to be adults. They will muck up and they will cause problems. And it's one thing to be there to help occasionally, to have a safety net if something is really bad. But equally, um, having everyone protected no matter what, the whole universal basic income crap. I mean, think about it. Uh, why should we get off our couch anymore? Why don't we just play video games every day? Why do we actually want to learn anything? Why be educated? And
Yeah.
I mean, I'll keep saying this, education and training are not the same thing. Most people today go to uni and do not get educated. Most people go to high school and don't get educated. They get trained.
Yeah.
They learn a vocation, a job that is not education.
Is that even the right way to do it though? Because what you and I are doing seems like a very good idea here.
Hmm.
And isn't education something that should be lifelong anyway? Is university even the right place to do education, or is this something that should be a part of our way of life from birth to death?
Yes and yes. It should be part of university, but in doing that, university should teach us how to um, think and how to process and how to be critical and how to sort of learn. So, I mean, universities should teach us how to go out there and do it. And a critical bit of universities that is not as widely and thoroughly sort of promoted anymore is debate. So, and I'll give a little bit of a plug. University of London, Birkbeck College. It's um, really good in their philosophy classes, etc. Roger Scruton, before he died, taught there for many years. Remarkable place. Now, they encourage um, dissent and people like me to talk, and there are people I disagree with, and there are hippies. Yeah, you know what I think of hippies. And we have debates. It's great. That is what a university should be.
Yeah.
Over in Queensland, and another university that I've been involved with for some time, I get told to, well, they don't work terribly well at doing this, but they tell me to shut up all the time, that I shouldn't be interrupting the lecturer or tutor or saying things that the class doesn't agree with or that might offend someone, even though it's true, or hurt someone's feelings or blah, blah, blah. I mean, I'm not insulting people. I'm having comments that challenge them. Uh, Gladfly. I mean, yeah, Gadfly.
But I
That's
hope they don't
not
kill
what a
you, Craig,
university.
because you are definitely a gadfly. I hope you don't have the same fate as Socrates here. I will vote not to kill you if I ever get the
Well, thank
opportunity.
you. Well, um hopefully I've got at least another 20 years of doing this, even if that does happen. He got it, so, and make it even more would be nice. But so um, when we're looking at this, I mean, it's possible to argue whether Socrates was a skeptic or not a skeptic, but I don't think he was really. I mean, he was skeptical of things, but I wouldn't say that he's a skeptic. So he's asserting knowledge in saying that he's ignorant of things. So ironically, there's a little bit of a ironic statement there. By saying what he doesn't know, he's also saying some of the things he does know. So we get now to the examined life and the unexamined life. And here we have Rodin and what everyone calls the thinker, which I've bitched about many times because that's not actually called the thinker. So do you know what that actually is? That guy sitting there thinking.
No, I don't. What is that?
So Rodin was portraying Dante at the gates of hell. So Dante is in purgatory with Virgil, and he's contemplating the gateway to hell.
So, is this at the start or the end of that story? Because I haven't read it, but I'm sort of vaguely familiar with it. I mean,
it's fairly much at the beginning. It's after purgatory, where there are a whole lot of people like Socrates and things like this who. This is early Christian thought. They weren't ever baptized, so they never really get to heaven, but they're also not getting to hell, so they're in purgatory forever. Virgil takes them into the entrance of hell, etc. And but as he's there, as he's contemplating the ye who enter these gates, despair, he sits there and he thinks, and that's part of Dante. So unfortunately, back in 1905, a journalist from New Yorker misrepresented it, and we've called it the thinker ever since. It's not what Rodin called it. But that's all I have to say. You can look up more about that one anyway. So we should question our own life. We shouldn't just assume that everything's good. All of us do that, of course, even I do. I mean, at the end of the day, you can sit there and say, well, I could be perfect, but none of us are. So it's not a question just for us philosophers or business leaders, politicians. It should not exclude anyone. All of us should be thinking about what we're doing, what we can do better. Is our life really something that we find happiness in? Is it seeking something that we want? Is it achieving something? As an example, maybe what you're doing can lead to happiness even though you're not in a high-powered job. Some people find happiness in growing plants. I knew a guy in Australia who ended up making quite a lot of money when he was old because he was growing orchids for years and propagating them. And suddenly they became popular, and you see orchids around everywhere. And some of his gene stock is now all over the world. And he didn't do it because he wanted to get rich. He did it because he loved growing orchids. I mean, I like orchids, but I couldn't spend all weekend out there pottering around doing these things. But he did. He loved it, and he knew everything there was to know about orchids. Depth of knowledge that was amazing in that one little area, and that's what he wanted to know. And he had other aspects of life that he was interested in as well, but that was his main thing. So introspectiveness is part of what we need to develop. We need to think about how we think, why we think, interact with other people. And I mean, with you here and others who will give feedback on these courses, then part of it's not just me sitting there ranting at you, but occasionally going back and forwards and asking questions, and you answer and I go back, etc. It's, as humans, we are societal creatures, and that's part of it. This is why I say university is best when we engage, and why it's important to learn how to think. And that's the difference between universities who tell you to shut up and ones who want you to be engaged. which I'm actually looking forward to next week. No more lockdown, going back, and I'll actually physically be in the uni again. Yay! None of this Zoom. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
So, so
Simple pleasures.
exactly, I know. So, questions and reflections. Now, one of the things to do here is to think about some of the aspects of what we've written. So Socrates was charged with several old charges, important to understand them. So I want you to think about that when you read. I want you to understand the difference between the different charges he was given. You'll read about that, of course, in the Apology. What happened halfway through when they were looking at sort of talking to him? Why would the trial happen the way it was? And I'm not going to give any real spoilers here, other than discussing this. I want you to think about what it meant for him to be in this condition, what it was that the group knew, what it was for him as a wise man, why he was being charged as an atheist. So part of what Socrates was saying is, I believe in the gods, I just don't care. I mean, so today we wouldn't see that as being atheistic. At that point, saying, I don't care what the gods do. They're up there doing their stuff. Don't get in my way. That was considered an atheist, funny enough. And think about that. Think about poor little Richard Dawkins if he went back to Greece. They'd tear him apart. He'd never survive. So his defense, why it wasn't accepted by the jury, he argued that death, well, you can't really injure him. So think about that one for a minute. I want you to think about that. So do you think he was right, Ryan, in saying that no one in the jury could injure him?
Well,
They're going to kill him, aren't they? I mean, isn't that injury?
yeah, I mean, well, he's going to die anyway. And one of the points is he's already 70 something years old. So long as he stands, like if truly living a good life is to live the examined life and he continues to do that to his death, how is he being injured? I mean, I don't know. What do you think about that?
I agree. And think about what they have done with his students, Plato, Aristotle. Think about what his legacy is.
Well, yeah, clearly it's Socrates probably would be interesting otherwise, but the fact that he was killed in this way makes him unforgettable. And so all of his students that wrote about him. So Plato almost certainly has, if Socrates hadn't done these things, the works of Plato would be less interesting. So he elevated Plato as a consequence of this. He went down in history. I mean, he embodies his principles. So if you're going to die, again, he's 70 something years old anyway. Why would you panic and escape or something only to have a few years at the end of your life and violate all of your basic principles right there at the end? I mean, I think he clearly did the right thing. Can they hurt him? The only way they could have hurt him was to scare him into breaking his principles right at the end. That would have been the way that they could have hurt him. And he did not give in to that. And he stuck to his principles until his death.
And which comes down to the last bit here to think about. So if he had chosen with Crito to escape, if Crito had convinced him, then wouldn't be the same story, would it? I mean, we wouldn't be sitting there going, oh, well, they said all these nasty things and then he ran away.
Yeah.
I mean, he really believed in his convictions until he didn't.
Yeah, I know that, and there's something you didn't mention this at all, Craig, but I can't help but also think of Jesus as I read this story, because Jesus was also killed in an unjust way. And if we didn't have Socrates, the only other person that comes to mind that we'd have left is Jesus to tell a similar story. Do you have any thoughts on the relationship between those two stories?
I think there's a lot of power in individuals who've been martyred. And it's not just those two either. So I won't give all the hints away yet, but there are other examples, especially when we get later in the course, like to Aquinas and things. Aquinas, of course, in his natural law theory, mentions a lot of instances of martyrs and others. There were lots of those in the early period of Rome. But even, and I'm not going to give his name away, Roman Republic, there's a famous myth of a soldier who was captured by the Gauls. And what happened was they threatened to torture him. And I'm going to let you see if you can dig up a story and post it. Now, what this soldier did, whether it's based on truth or not is another thing, but it's a Roman myth that's gone down. He thrust his right arm, the one he used for everything, sword, etc., into the fire, and he held it. So they said, "We're going to torture you, we're going to skin you, boil you, blah blah blah," and he just held it until it burnt off. And guess what the Gauls did?
What?
They let him go, and they surrendered.
Huh.
So, I mean, this man had, could you imagine someone standing there for like 15 minutes as his arm burns off, and the pain that would entail, just not moving, going, screw you, you can torture me. Guess what? I don't care. Now, that of course is one of the foundational myths of Rome. But the whole point here is, imagine the difference towards certain later emperors who had their head turned into a bowl or acted as a footstool for a bunch of Hungarian warriors who went around using an emperor as a footstool for a while. And think of the difference in how society changed and what happened to Rome. So Rome at that stage was growing.
Yeah.
These people were willing to die for what they believed.
Yeah.
And what happened instead? Society got better. The other end, you have someone who was so shit scared that as an emperor, rather than fighting to the death, he becomes a footstool. And Rome falls.
Yeah.
So the courage and conviction to stand up for society matters.
Yeah.
So a little bit of reading there if people want. Some of those are a little bit obscure, some aren't. Thucydides, of course, is a wonderful read. I particularly like it anyway. Old Whitehead there is interesting. Shakespeare, go for it. Tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark is a wonderful read. Some of the others, like I said, with Marshall, you've already mentioned Gadfly or Spur. And the meaning, of course, these are translations and what we take them to be. And Dreyfus Affair, look it up. There's a few good movies on it. Eliot was always, old T.S. Eliot's always interesting. I mean, don't always agree with him either, but I love reading him. Yeah, look at some of the others if you get time. Cannon with an anti-liberal defense of free speech is also an interesting read. And I hope you enjoyed for the week. Next week, we will continue with Plato for the moment. We leave him shortly after that, but we are going to look at the first 2 books of the Republic. There are 10 books. If you get time to read them, great. I'm not going to force you to. You can go back to it later, but 2 books of the Republic is something that you should be able to do without too much trouble in a week.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much, Craig.
You're welcome. All right. Have a great day.